What then shall we say that Abraham hath found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. For what does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Hi, welcome to the Bible Dialogues. What's this all about? We'll be looking at Romans 4, 1-2 to see what Paul has really been saying here. My name is Mike Whitney, here to share with you today. My broad goal is to share useful insight into Scripture that seems to be missed or previously unresolved. The explanations provided are open for debate, but I also do not seek to share ideas that are not well studied. Romans 4, 1-2, the topic of today's study, has remained confusing for far too long. I propose the problem has in part been due to the failure to detect Paul's use of sarcasm or irony here. This irony will first be explained logically and subsequently portrayed in a dramatic style. We need a starting point. The best starting point is Romans 3, since the topic here provides the background for Romans 4, which begins with the words, "What then shall we say?" This use of then means Romans 3 must be partially in view. I will share some highlights without explaining the whole problem addressed. This earlier situation concerns pressure on Roman Gentiles caused by non-Christian Jews who were boasting in the law and their works. This proclamation to the Gentiles involves the supposed need to include the practice of the law and works within the Christian walk. This isn't a well-recognized reading, it's a new one, so don't look for it. Consequently, Paul addresses the folly of the boasting in 3:26, saying, "Where then is boasting?" The question actually asks, where is room for boasting in the law under the gospel? He notes that boasting is excluded. Paul continues an argument against living under the Mosaic law in verses 26-31, which follows with the ironic approach in Romans 4. Perhaps the Jews have spoken of Abraham as an example of doing the law, or alternatively, Paul introduces Abraham suddenly as a familiar person who needs no introduction. So Romans 4, 1-2 reads as, "What then shall we say that Abraham our forefather has found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God." Again, the phrase, "what shall we say," conveys that the topic of law and works of Romans 3 and the boastfulness serves as a context for these initial verses of Romans 4. Paul indicates an evaluation will be made. He invites an interpretation or guess of Abraham's view, effectively saying, what then shall we speculate or suggest that Abraham has found on this matter of boasting in the law and works? This anticipation of a discovery by Abraham, however, has been marked with irony by adding an extra phrase, according to the flesh. An absurdity appears with the suggestion that Abraham could find a gain, a benefit with God through his own flesh or his own devices. Essentially, verse 1 shows that Abraham gains nothing by the works of the law. Obviously, Abraham has not reflected on issues of works and is not guilty of such improper thinking. This point should become clearer when I share a dramatic vocalized reading of the verses later. Verse 2, again, provides further explanation of the foolish speculative discovery just seen. The verse at first seems clear and direct, namely, for if Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about. However, this direct reading would not explain the finding of the previous verses with this ironic twist, adding to the context, but not before God. He indicates that Abraham has a better basis to boast in his works when compared to the Jewish boasters in Rome, yet neither the works nor the boast could add value with his relationship. This reading is obscured by unfortunate translations. I am using the New King James Version because it presents the best wording, preserving the ironic phrases at the end of both verses. the dramatic vocalized sense is in this fashion. What then shall we say that Abraham, our father, has found, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. Ha ha ha. Sorry for the bad dramatization style. Anyhow, the explanations in each of the verses then gets marked with a phrase that says the remark just given is not to be accepted as a satisfactory explanation. Paul nullifies or contradicts what he says, sort of like satire would do. He uses an indirect rebuke to show a rejection of boasting in the law, but the real ones doing the boasting were the non-Christian Jews, of the ones of concern in the previous chapter. This concept of indirect rebuke is not commonly known, and you'll not really find it anywhere except with what I'm sharing. Now, the irony likely would be recognized immediately by the Gentiles. Later readers, however, do not understand the context due to several aspects being missed, namely, that the audience only has Gentiles, that the boasters were only non-Christian Jews. The boasting of the law and works was being done by non-Christian Jews. The use of Romans 4:1-2 as a rejection of any boasting in the law and works is what is shared in Romans 3:27. The sharing of Romans 4:1-2 then acts as an indirect rebuke of the boasters' claims. This means that anything Paul's complaining about the Jewish non-Christian boasters, he's actually representing Abraham in that role. And that way, he's not giving fodder to complain against the non-Jewish Christians in Rome. Review this text version of the indirect rebuke versus direct rebuke. Press pause for more time. This indirect style of rebuke has been applied by Paul in several places within the letter, but this has not been sufficiently recognized as a feature of Paul's writing. Having rejected the boasting of these Jews and their promotion of the works of the law, Paul then can share the problems of such reliance on the law for righteousness. And after hearing the explanation, people then can continue to read Romans 4 with this clarified context. If possible, I shall share an analysis of the rest of Romans 4 as understood by this approach taken in the first verses. Thanks for following this episode of the Bible Dialogues. Please like, share, and subscribe. Leave comments and questions too.